back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. As always, I'm Stef Albiero. I'm here with the fantasy phenom, Alex Lott, my partner in crime in this fantasy game. And we're rocking and rolling with these startups. We're rocking and rolling with these Dynasty rankings. We're posting them, whether they're rookies, whether they're full-on Dynasty rankings. We're helping our community put together smart decisions, just get another piece of data going into these drafts. You know, it's so hard when we do Dynasty rankings to really say one guy's better than the other in a vacuum because there's roster construction, there's context. Are you a productive struggle? Are you a full-on contender? We're going to do our best. We're going to take a stab at it. Our top 12 running back rankings in Dynasty leagues right now. Alex, you ready to dive into these running backs?
I'm ready to dive in, but first I have to give you a coffee cheers this morning, Steph. You know, it's not very often we get the chance to knock out, you know, a nice podcast, a nice video here in the morning. So we're both cranking our coffee. And I know we don't ask this very often. We actually bypass it. We go straight to the Discord. But look, if you've been tuning into us for a while on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, follow along with what we're doing. And then the next level down from that is that Discord in the link below. We're jumping into running back rankings today, 1 through 12. We did quarterbacks earlier this week. Rankings are something that our Discord has been asking for. So the Discord is an opportunity. If there's content you want to see, if there's information you want, videos that you want us to make, like that's the place for your voice to be heard. And we're just reviewing rosters, reviewing trades, talking about NFL news and stuff in there all the time. So if you're not in the Discord already, just check it out. Free to join. It's an absolute blast in there. And you mentioned it, Steph, a new Double Move Sports Dynasty League is starting up soon. So if you want a chance to go against us, that's the place to do it. But Steph, in terms of these running back rankings, we're going through 1 through 12 today. So number one's JT. We'll just start it off with JT. Similar to the quarterback, it was kind of chalk at the one spot with Josh Allen. At running back, Jonathan Taylor right now, in most outlets you look, unless someone's looking for clickbait, they're going to have Jonathan Taylor as their number one. It's pretty clear cut for me. He's young. He's in a great situation. He's got a great offensive line. The talent is there coming off of an RB1 season. He's efficient as a pass catcher. He has everything you want at the running back spot. The age is fantastic as well. He's entering into his prime. So Jonathan Taylor's locked and loaded for me at the number one spot. Anything else for you to add, Steph?
No, and I love having him on my roster in Dynasty Leagues because if I'm a contender, I want him as a way to push all my chips in and compete this year and not have to mortgage my future. If I'm rebuilding, he can be that cornerstone asset that I build around for the next 2-3 years, 2 years until JT hits age 25, which is that age peak. And the fact that they brought in Matt Ryan gives me flashbacks to the Phillip Rivers days, right? Where he was, as a rookie, RB6 in PPR, 36 receptions for 300 yards and a touchdown through the air. In 2021 with Wentz, 51 targets, 10% target share, 360 yards, 2 touchdowns. So we know what Taylor can do on the ground. He has that Nick Chubb level elite rushing ability, and he's been able to get it done consistently through the air. He's been efficient, a lot of yards after the catch, touchdowns through the air. We should see more of the same. And what we saw in 2021 was that the Colts offensive line, who's revered as one of the top O-lines in the NFL, they had a lot of missing pieces. They had guys testing positive for COVID. Ryan Kelly's had a personal family situation. He had to miss some time. Quentin Nelson was hurt. So hopefully this year, with Matt Ryan bringing some stability to the offense, the offensive line coming together, we can see more of the same from JT. Should be a locked and loaded RB1, probably the RB1 in redraft as well. Now let's get into our first take, which may be a little bit contrary to the consensus right now. Our consensus rankings have Javonte Williams at our RB2 in Dynasty Leagues. We saw what he was able to do as a rookie in a 50-50 split with Melvin Gordon, RB17, 22nd in fantasy points per game, literally an even 203 carries for both Javonte and Melgo on the season. But to see a round 2 running back who was traded up for by the Broncos get 200 carries in year one, that's great volume. He was 15th in carries in the NFL, and he's already become the pass-catching back in Denver. 10% target share, 53 targets last year to Melvin Gordon's 38. Super efficient through the air, 81% catch rate. That's top 10 in the NFL. 43 receptions for 316 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season through the air. So even if Melvin Gordon does get re-signed, he does come back to Denver, yeah, that hurts Javonte, especially in redraft. But in Dynasty, this is a guy that you want to be starting every week. We saw the upside when Melvin Gordon was out, and Javonte Williams had a 28-point plus PPR outing against the Kansas City Chiefs with Teddy Bridgewater running the offense. You get Russell Wilson now infused into Denver. It's nothing but runway and upside for Javonte Williams, who's still just 21 years old.
Yeah, with Javonte, it's tough in this next tier. I know we're going to have some polarizing takes, but this next tier, I'll foreshadow it here. It's Javonte, Swift, and Najee for us, kind of in this tier behind Jonathan Taylor. The gap between 2 and 4 is so razor thin for me. But with Javonte, it just comes down to the age as that tiebreaker, because when you compare him to Najee, because I feel like most people have Najee as their RB2 right now in Dynasty. Najee is a absolute volume workhorse in Pittsburgh. We know he's probably going to see another 300 carries. He's probably going to get another at least 80 targets this year. I think the targets might come down a little bit from the Big Ben checkdowns last season. But with Najee Harris, the volume is up. The efficiency is going to be low. With Javonte Williams in Denver, it is the opposite end of that spectrum. It's very high efficiency, both on the ground and through the air. He was able to do it last year. You mentioned with Teddy Bridgewater for a majority of that season. Their offense was 23rd in scoring. So touchdown opportunities weren't massive for Denver, but they like to pound it in on the ground. Javonte and Melvin Gordon, both really, really solid in the red zone and things like that. So now you do bring over Russell Wilson, and you look at the situation between Javonte and Najee, it's two sides of the coin. Javonte, I do not expect him to get the same volume as Najee Harris, but if I had to bet on who has more rushing yards in 2022, I don't know which side I'm taking. Like, I think that could be close. I think Javonte Williams, just from a yards per carry standpoint, is going to be able to make up for the carries that Najee is getting that he's not in that offense. And if you look at who's going to score more touchdowns in 2022, I'm taking Javonte there. I'm taking Javonte in Denver with Russell Wilson, with a good offensive line. So yes, Najee Harris might get more volume, but who's actually going to have more value? It's probably going to be Javonte Williams for 2022. I know Najee, you feel like he's going to get more of that receiving workload, but he does go from Big Ben to Mitch Trubisky. He goes from 94 targets, sometimes a target funnel for the Pittsburgh Steelers because their offense couldn't go anywhere. I expect that to come down. And then on the flip side, you have Javonte Williams, who had 53 targets last season as a rookie. We don't know about Melvin Gordon at the time of this recording, but things are trending towards him leaving. You expect his targets to go up. So if you just look at 2022, the situation is much better for Javonte Williams. That allows us to project forward and say we can assume the situation's probably going to be better for Javonte over the next 2-3 seasons. And then you add the icing on the cake for me that Javonte Williams is still only 21 years old compared to Najee Harris being 24 years old. And that's enough for me to solidify him as the number 2 guy. The most important thing with some of these players is the talent. And honestly, I think the talent of Javonte Williams and Najee Harris is right in step with each other. I would have a really hard time picking which one just from a talent perspective right now. I'd rather have my offense. So I consider that piece of the equation a wash. So all those things kind of coming together are why we have Javonte as our number 2. He just checks all the boxes, should get a lot of volume, should be very efficient. Touchdown upside is there. Offense is good. And he's still super young. And he's had an RB2 season under his belt already in just 1 year in the NFL.
The efficiency from Javonte Williams was amazing on the ground. I talked about the receiving side of things to start off, but especially by rookie standards. I mean, not everybody can be Saquon Barkley or Ezekiel Elliott rookie season where they're putting up over 1,200 rushing yards. But for Javonte Williams, top 10 in juke rate and evaded tackles. We knew that coming out of UNC based on the production and what he did in college. All of that carried over to the next level. And these top 10 in yards created and yards created per touch. So Javonte is a running back that doesn't get touched often. And when he does get touched, he's tough to bring down. But let's shift over to our RB3, DeAndre Swift, a guy that I've been consistently above consensus on. I feel like you've been right at consensus levels with him, and he slots in here as the RB3 at just 23 years old. Swift is showing us time and time again, contrary to the hot takes you see on Twitter every day. I'm out here in the trenches on the timeline. You can follow us at Double Move Sport to go at it with us and give us your takes as well. But Christian McCaffrey, James Robinson, these running backs have showed us time and time again, season after season, you can be the worst offense in the league. You can be on a gross offense, and you can still be a productive running back for fantasy. And that's what DeAndre Swift is. In just his second year in the NFL, he was 8th in fantasy points per game, thanks to an 18% target share, second in the league, only behind Alvin Kamara. He was 5th in routes run as well. So I think that gives him even some stability to that target share. It wasn't a one-off thing. Swift was the one on the field in third down situations and passing game situations. He was getting open. What you see from Swift is not going to be this this on-the-ground workhorse. He's not going to be a 300-carry player, and we don't need him to be that. He's much more from that Alvin Kamara type of role than, a Derrick Henry or even a Najee Harris. 12 carries and 6 targets per game. That's 18 total touches a game, 80 total yards from scrimmage per game. That's more than enough to get you really confident in what Swift can do on a weekly basis. The only reason I dropped Swift down from 2 to 3, and the only thing that's kind of trending against him is the fact that he should see more target competition in this offense. They brought in DJ Chark. They're probably going to bring in some weapons in the draft. We have seen Chris Olave mocked to them in the first round. TJ Hawkins is now coming back healthy. Amon-Ra St. Brown in year 2 after a breakout. But even with those weapons coming in, the Lions aren't going to be in winning game scripts this year, whether it's Goff, whether it's a rookie quarterback. And I think that upside balances out some of the target competition if maybe the Lions take a step up. Maybe Malik Willis really is that dude. And we've seen the Lions rebuilding the right way, building up that offensive line first and foremost, bringing in Penei Sewell last year. Hopefully we continue to see Sewell and the rest of that O-line take steps forward. But Swift is set to smash. He's already showed us what he can do.
I had him as my number 4 running back behind Najee Harris. Those two guys are really close for me. But I still do love DeAndre Swift and it's hard to rank him in front of Najee Harris because he doesn't get the volume. In fantasy football, volume is so important. And Swift is more of the Alvin Kamara type asset for this offense. He's going to get 12 carries and 6 targets a game, which is exactly actually what he had last season in Detroit. And then from a size perspective, he's the same size as Kamara. Swift is 5'9", 211. Kamara is 5'10", 215. So Swift is a different player in terms of he is more of a physical player, speed, power, rather than the finesse player that Kamara is. But in terms of how they're utilized, they're very, very similar. So the question for Swift and the thing that's going to need to elevate for him, and the reason I had him at number 4 behind Najee Harris is because he's on the Detroit Lions. Their offensive line, you said it, is actually fine, and there's a lot of optimism there. The offense is getting better. They're adding pieces. They get a quarterback in place. Jared Goff isn't terrible either, but if they get a better quarterback in place, I think that could elevate his touchdown upside. So for me with Swift, it just all comes down to how many touchdowns can he score. And going into a season, if you have a running back that you don't believe is going to score 10 touchdowns, it's really hard for him to be a guy that's going to win you a league. So for Swift, I think that could turn around. And as this offense and this Lions team continues to get a little bit better, I think that narrative might shift. And he's only 23 years old. So there's time for that to happen while he's still entering that age prime if it happens in the next 1 to 2 seasons. So for Swift, I think that's the biggest question mark for me. But from a talent perspective, from a volume perspective, I think the 12 carries, 6 targets type volume a game is perfectly fine for his skill set. So all that's good. It just comes down to this Lions team. How many touchdowns can he score and what does that upside look like? I think in terms of competition at the position, they have Jamal Williams there right now, who was utilized a little bit in and out last season. I don't expect them to draft another rookie, but I don't know if Jamal Williams is going to be that long-term number 2 in Detroit. So it's going to be really interesting this year to see how that shift and that time split breaks down between these two guys. DeAndre Swift, before he went down with that injury late in the season, was getting around 70-75% of snaps each and every game, and that was more than enough for him to make an impact in fantasy. Finishing last season as the PPR running back 15, but that was only in 13 games, and in a couple of those games, he was banged up. So that's more like 11, 12 games for DeAndre Swift and still give you a high-end RB2 performance on the year.
Jamal Williams' contract, he's set to be an unrestricted free agent in 2023. He actually could be a cut candidate. Only $1.6 million in dead cap if they choose to move. Now, there's probably not a reason to move on from Jamal Williams. It's a $4.6 million cap hit, $1.6 million against the cap if they cut him. So depending on how things go in the draft, the quarterback situation, Jamal Williams could be gone sooner rather than later. And that would vacate a ton of volume for a 27-year-old Jamal Williams to leave this offense who had 153 carries and 28 targets. Imagine even 50% of that coming over to DeAndre Swift. You're going to be really, really happy with what you have, that he is truly that next Kamara-type player. But we talked about Najee Harris a bunch. Let's kind of drop our takes in here on him. Our RB4 right now in Dynasty, you definitely like him a lot more on your roster if you are a contender because everything is there except for 2 question marks, right? The draft capital is there, first-round pick, the opportunity's there, the 100% snap share games, the measurables are there. He has the size, the speed, the pass-catching chops. The rookie year production was there, 1,200 rushing yards. 94 targets, caught 74 of those, 467 yards, had 3 touchdowns to the air, 7 on the ground. So double-digit touchdowns as a rookie. Same thing that DeAndre Swift did as well. The only question marks is the quarterback situation of Pittsburgh, how that's going to impact the passing work. Trubisky does scare me. I really hope for Najee's sake they do draft a Kenny Pickett or a Sam Howell, someone who isn't going to be an athletic quarterback that's going to run the ball. Trubisky was a guy that was putting up significant rushing numbers. He could suck some of that value out of the offense for Najee Harris, where he can take off and just scramble for that first down, whereas Big Ben wasn't giving you any of that. And that's why we're so high on Jonathan Taylor with Matt Ryan. It's because we know Matt Ryan's not going to do a ton of scrambling. It's not going to have really any production on the ground at all. So that's one thing for Najee Harris. And then at age 24, I think if you're not a contender, you should be willing to sell for a tier down from Najee Harris. I really commend you, Alex, for you flip Najee for Kamara and a 23 first. So you're able to get Kamara to still maintain that contender and value on your roster for 2022. And you got that 23 first to backfill next year once Kamara's a year older with more question marks in New Orleans. Could be trending down as he's getting older and there's questions there. But I love the way you kind of parlayed that into I'll maintain some of the production for this year that I lose with Najee and then get a very valuable 2023 first round pick that could be a stud running back to backfill that. But another, deal that I've seen get done, so I'd recommend if you have Najee Harris and you aren't a full-on contender, is trade Najee for Antonio Gibson and an early to mid-second round pick in this year's draft. I think you can get a deal like that done while we have yet to see Najee have any negative impacts to his production on the field.
Yeah, no, thanks for giving me the shout out on that deal. And I have to say, it's even better than it sounds on the surface. It was actually Najee for Kamara in the 101 this year, which will be Breece Hall. So I was able to backfill Najee with Breece, who is probably going to be close for me anyway, depending on where he lands and what draft capital he gets. But I got Kamara as well, and then I flipped Kamara for Ezekiel Elliott and a 23 first. So I basically netted Breece Hall, Ezekiel Elliott, and a 23 first for Najee Harris. So if people are high on him in your leagues, just feel around and see what's out there. But no, you said it best with Najee. It all comes down to just the volume. What volume is he going to see? And for me, the most important thing is the receiving volume. We saw all the dump downs with Big Ben last season, and that showed up through his catch rate. I mean, 74 receptions on 94 targets is fantastic, but a lot of that is because these catches were like at or behind the line of scrimmage. So for Najee Harris, it just comes down to how much is Mitch Trubisky, A, going to get them into scoring opportunities, and B, how much is he going to throw to the running back? The last time we saw Mitch Trubisky as a full-time starter, 2020, it was kind of 50-50 split between he and Nick Foles, but Trubisky in 2019 started 15 games for the Bears. And we did see Tariq Cohen have 104 targets that year. So I know he was utilized in a lot of different ways. Not all of it was out of the backfield. He is a purely scat back. But Trubisky had to get him the ball. So 104 targets for Cohen is great. Montgomery added 35 targets from the running back position that season. So Trubisky, some of that's the scheme of the offense, but he definitely is willing in the right scheme, in the right situation, to throw the ball to the running back. Mike Tomlin's a smart guy, and he's going to find creative ways for Najee Harris to get the ball in space, especially when that offensive line is still brutal. So for me, I think Trubisky, if he can upgrade this offense just a little bit into some more scoring opportunities, that outweighs some of the potential, downgrade in targets that Najee could see this season if he adds another touchdown or two. But for me, it just all comes down to this offensive line. I mean, the offensive line has not gotten any better this offseason in Pittsburgh. I hope they address it in the draft, but you start to think they might take a quarterback in the first round. So to me, if the offensive line is brutal again this season and they don't spend a ton of draft capital on it and it's not going to get any better, I don't know why we could expect Najee Harris's efficiency to get much better in this offense. As someone that was heavily invested in him last year, I watched a lot of Pittsburgh Steelers football. Unfortunately, it was brutal. And it was just the ugliest offense to watch of all time. Najee Harris was running into a pile over and over and over. And you have to think about it. If Najee Harris is 24 years old, he is going to go into the season with another inefficient season, most likely, because the offense is not going to be great. The offensive line is going to be bad. So even if we say for the 2023 season, he finally gets a better quarterback in place, he finally gets the offensive line we want, he finally can make that jump to be a volume plus efficiency guy, a Derrick Henry type player with more targets, a Christian McCaffrey type guy, then he's already 25 years old going into that season, and that's best case scenario. So I know Najee Harris last year was still a top 3 running back, PPR running back 3. So that's kind of what you want this year. And that's what Najee Harris gives you, is just stability. He didn't have any games above 30 fantasy points, which for a running back to finish in the top 3 in PPR, not have a single game above 30 fantasy points, is kind of wild. But because the volume was always there, he always just gave you 15, 20-point games over and over and over. So that's the stability that Najee Harris gives you. So at already, being 24 years old and looking like it's going to be another inefficient season, I think Najee Harris in redraft still should be a top 5 running back in PPR leagues. But if we're dreaming for this upside of a good quarterback and a good offensive line and all these things, we just have to take into account that Najee came into the league a little older, and that's why we have him behind guys like DeAndre Swift and Javonte Williams.
Now let's move from this tier of these young ascending pieces and talk about this tier of Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon, the guys that you see are both past the age apex, but are league-winning running backs for this year and have some long-term stability as well with their contract situations. So let's start with CMC, who we have as our consensus RP5 in Dynasty right now. That's exactly where he finished in fantasy points per game in 7 games in 2021. And for me, McCaffrey is this year's Joe Mixon. Over the last couple seasons, people feel burned. They're saying, I'm out on CMC, that the injury concerns are too much for me. We've already seen CMC's ADP crash in Dynasty leagues, and I think in redraft, you're going to be able to get him back of the first round, which is a pretty crazy value when you think about what he brings to the table. I think he becomes a value at that ADP because when healthy, we all know that Christian McCaffrey is one of the best running backs in the league, relied super heavily upon by the Carolina Panthers. In games above 50% snaps last year, he averaged 8.3 targets per game. That's wide receiver 1 type volume, and also averaged 17 carries in those games. And I know him being 25.8 years old right now is tough. That's almost a year past the age peak for running backs, but 70% of the CMC we're used to is still a locked-in RB1. I wouldn't be mad at all if Chuba Hubbard and Dante Foreman were coming in and taking some of the volume, especially on the ground, from McCaffrey. And hopefully that's what the Panthers do this year. But with Matt Rule trying to compete for his job, we may just see him ride CMC into the ground just to give something to that offense. But we're hoping the situation get better in Carolina, whether it's with a new quarterback or Matt Rule getting fired. What CMC has shown us is that he is quarterback proof. He's situation proof. He commands volume, and he's great with it on the air and on the ground. And right now on Keep Trade Cut, they have Christian McCaffrey as the RB6, but where he's going in super flex startups is 24th overall off the board. So imagine starting your draft, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Russell Wilson at that 2-3 turn. He's such a value right now in these startups, especially if you want to be one of those teams where you don't have to necessarily pick all-in contender or full rebuild from year 1. You can play that middle ground where you have a mix of pieces where you start with a Josh Allen to give you that stability up front, and then you circle back with a Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, depending on landing spot and how your league is valuing these running backs. Or you could even start with a Javonte Williams in the first round, McCaffrey in the second, and Stephon Diggs in the third. Like, there's so many ways to build a roster where McCaffrey helps you compete, but you don't have to mortgage your future to take him. He's not going 101, even 105 right now. And so I think for 2022, he's set up, if he could stay healthy, to smash. And health is really the only concern with him at the moment because it can't get worse situationally.
Yeah, McCaffrey is tough. And McCaffrey is one of these players where it's like if you are a contender in your league or you are close and you're like, I need that one thing to push me over the top and I'm willing to take a gamble to do it, McCaffrey, I will be targeting him everywhere because I'm in several leagues. A couple of them, McCaffrey's on a contender. They're probably not going to move him. It just doesn't make sense. But there's a couple leagues I'm in with McCaffrey as kind of this like middle tier player. And if I really wanted to put myself over the top, I've tried. It hasn't worked. But I've been actively trying to acquire Christian McCaffrey because he's still young. It's not a matter of age. This isn't what we typically see from running backs. Like they hit a certain age and they just start to decline. This is strictly due to the availability, which I know can be related to age and things like that. But McCaffrey's only 25 years old. He's younger than, I think of him as being super old, like 27, 28, but he's younger than your Ezekiel Elliott's, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, same age as Joe Mixon. So McCaffrey still, if he can stay healthy, has 2-3 more seasons of elite play left, just if we're basing it off of what we typically see from running backs that are these workhorses in the past and when they hit that age apex. So for Christian McCaffrey, every time he's been on the field, regardless of who the quarterback is, who the head coach is, you said he's quarterback proof. He's completely situation proof, which is absolutely true. And when you're betting on Christian McCaffrey for these contending rosters, it just all comes down to availability. We know what he did in 2019, 2018. 2018 was RB2. 2019 was the ridiculous record-breaking season.
Unreal.
2020, he played week 1 and 2. He put up 28 fantasy points, 24 fantasy points. Missed a ton of time, came back for one game, played 70% of the snaps in that game, put up 37 fantasy points, coming off an injury and playing one game and getting re-injured. Then we fast forward to 2021. People are like, all right, he was hurt 1 year, whatever. Comes out, doesn't even score a touchdown in week 1 and still puts up 27 fantasy points. Then he posts 24. Then he leaves the game with the hamstring injury, misses time, comes back later that season, only 50% of snaps, puts up 14 points, then 26, then 24, then gets hurt again. So it's like every time he is on the field, even if he is coming back from an injury, getting limited snaps, he's putting up fantasy points. Last season in one of those games where he came back, only played 59% of snaps, still posted 26 fantasy points because of what he does through the air. So with Christian McCaffrey, it's not a matter of his efficiency. It's not a matter of his production. It's not that his play on the field is dropping off because of his age or because of these injuries. When he's on the field, he is the best player in fantasy football. It's not close. It just comes down to, can he stay healthy? And are you someone that buys into the injury-prone narrative or not? So for me, if I'm a contender in a dynasty league, I am trying to acquire Christian McCaffrey if I can, because if he can stay healthy for a full season, there's honestly no reason he shouldn't be the RB1 in 2022 or beyond if he can just be on the field.
So staying in this tier, let's talk about Joe Mixon. We said this going into redraft season last year after many, many people were fading Mixon because of the injury-riddled seasons where we really saw the Bengals shut Mixon down after they lost Joe Burrow, and they knew they weren't going to contend. They just shut Mixon down, knowing that they've already paid him. They've given him the long-term deal. They don't need to bang up this workhorse running back any more than they need to. And I think that's what scared a lot of people away. But you and I saw that from a mile away. And when healthy, and we've said this every step of the way as well, Mixon is a low-end RB1 at absolute worst when healthy and on the field. He's coming off an RB7 season where in fantasy points per game, he was that mid-range RB1. And he's been at or on pace for over 1,100 rushing yards every year since 2018. So I know he's past the age apex, but he is the contending running back you want for this season that you can sell high after the year. But you love Mixon so much, and where the upside comes into play, and we saw it last year, this situation is great. And we said that as soon as Giovanni Bernard left in free agency, but I don't think we expected this type of bump in this situation. We did not expect the Bengals to take that huge step forward. Nobody did. Nobody saw them going to the Super Bowl. But Joe Mixon on now a Super Bowl level offense, 7th in snap share and opportunity share, 18 carries a game and 3 targets. He is a true workhorse on the ground. And even if the volume through the air isn't McCaffrey or Kamara level, he's still top 10 in routes run and route participation. So I think there's a lot of opportunity through the air actually for Joe Mixon to take a step up. He had the second best catch rate in the league at 88%. He's catching everything thrown his way. So imagine if there's an injury to Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, something changes in the offense, maybe defenses start running too high safeties, and it just opens up so much volume for Mixon. And maybe the image of Samaje Perine being out there in that crucial Super Bowl situation that kind of lost them the game, maybe that leaves a sour taste in the mouth of Zach Taylor, and they're willing to say, hey, let's leave Mixon out there on the field in these 2-minute drills down the stretch where we need to tie the game up. But even without an increase in passing work, Mixon's going to be just fine.
Yeah, he's a perfect contending back. We talked about McCaffrey being 25 years old. Mixon's 25 years old, will be 26 for this season. And you said it best. The Bengals took the step up we wanted to see, and Mixon was able to, for the most part, stay
16
healthy.
16 touchdowns, 5th in red zone touches.
Yeah, he is everything you want from a dynasty running back. He's a workhorse. He's involved in the passing game. It's a high-volume offense that has a ton of scoring opportunities. And the one knock, or the biggest knock, there's one more I'll address next, but the biggest knock on Mixon was it was his availability and his ability to stay healthy. Proved that, debunked that myth this season. The other big one was just the efficiency of this Bengals offense and how bad the offensive line is. It's like, okay, you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. The offensive line is terrible. Well, guess what? The offensive line was terrible last season. Joe Mixon still had 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns, only 4.1 yards per carry, which definitely leaves some opportunity for improvement. And you look at what they've done this offseason, overhauling the complete offensive line, bringing in names like Alex Kappa from Tampa Bay, Lyle Collins from Dallas, a couple other names that should have an opportunity to start as well. They could address it again in the draft. So the offensive line has improved tremendously. Joe Mixon's going to continue to be a workhorse next season. And what I love about him in Dynasty as a contender is, yes, he's going to be 26 this season, but I see his runway as 2, if not 3 more seasons in Cincinnati, because if you look at his contract, got the contract extension before last season. He's locked in for this year on the Bengals. He's under contract for 2023 as well. The dead cap hit would be over $5 million. So you expect him to be on Cincinnati, barring something crazy, for 2023. So you're locked in 2 years in Cincinnati. Technically, he's under contract in 2024, but the dead cap at that point would be only $2.7 million. They're going to be looking at extending Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, some of these other guys. So 2024, it's a bit iffy if they can still give Joe Mixon a $10 million plus contract at the running back spot with some of the other names in this offense. But what I love about it, he's locked in most likely for the next 2 seasons in Cincy. And then even beyond that, who's to say he can't go be a Melvin Gordon type name somewhere else, a Leonard Fournette somewhere else, where he can have more productive seasons on another offense if that's what happens down the line. So yes, he's a little bit older, but he just came off the best season of his career. The offense is improving. The team is improving. There's no reason Joe Mixon shouldn't smash again in 2022 as long as he can stay healthy.
So right below this tier of these safe, known options with upside, the next name on this list, Breece Hall, the only running back, really the only rookie that we're going to have. The only rookie that we're going to have in the top 12 across this whole series of quarterback ones, running back ones, wide receiver ones, tight end ones that we're putting together this week. And it's all because of the upside. It's all because of the upside. We don't know where he's going to land. He's not even 21 years old yet, which is amazing. But he has the most clear 3-down workhorse profile of the projected top 3 running backs. Right now, he's being mocked round 1. He's being mocked round 2. Landing spots that have been thrown out there, which I don't put too much stock in at this point. This is the worst part of the year where everyone's just overthinking these drafts. There's too much clickbait out there. Everyone's saying Breece Hall's going to go to Tampa. Breece Hall's going to go to the Bills. I'm not putting too much stock in that. But what you love about Breece Hall and why he's the clear 101 in Dynasty rookie drafts, super flex or non-super flex, is because he's an early declare. He never missed a game in college. He was great as a true freshman at Iowa State, 897 rushing yards, another 252 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. Then went back-to-back seasons as the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, over 1,400 rushing yards, over 1,750 scrimmage yards and 23 touchdowns. Both of those seasons improved efficiency on the ground every year, took on more passing work every year. He caught 36 balls as a junior. So this is a true workhorse running back. That's what he profiles to be, and there's not a ton of debate. When you look at the RB2, Kenneth Walker doesn't have the receiving type profile, doesn't have a long of a sample size of being elite at the college level. He's the safest in this class, and Breece Hall, there's no holes in his production. At 5'11", 217 pounds, he comes in at that Dalvin Cook, comes in at that Cam Akers size, speed, and athleticism. The low-hanging fruit, another Iowa State running back, David Montgomery at 5'10", 223 pounds. He ran a 4.63. We see Breece Hall slightly smaller from a size perspective, but running a 4.39, elite athleticism, above 94th percentile across all of his combine metrics. So Breece Hall could be the guy that we see jump up to that Javonte Williams level a year from now, and that's why you have to love him as a RB1 without even seeing him play a snap in the NFL.
Yeah, we've got him as our consensus RB7 here, almost as like a placeholder, assuming this range of outcomes, he's going to be there. But there's a world where after the draft, he drops or rises in our rankings just based on the draft capital and the landing spot. I think at this number 7 spot, based on the profile, based on the player, we're assuming a decent landing spot where he's not buried behind like a Derrick Henry or something like that in the second round, or at worst case, early third round. As long as he's not going somewhere like with a established workhorse, something completely out of the ordinary, he's going to be around this range for us at the RB7. But I think the more likely scenario is for him to rise actually rather than fall, because if he ends up somehow going in the back of round 1 to a Kansas City, to a Buffalo, even if he went early round 2 to a Houston, I know it's kind of a gross landing spot, but from the ability to be a workhorse perspective, that's appealing to me as well. There's a couple spots where I would be really interested in Breece Hall, where he could move up my rankings if he ends up there. But I think right now as a placeholder, we have him here as our RB7, just because you mentioned it. I don't need to repeat all the incredible metrics on Breece as a player.
I don't think there's a single bad landing spot for Breece Hall.
Yeah.
I really don't. I mean, even if he goes to a horrible team, we've just talked about Christian McCaffrey and DeAndre Swift, who are on these perceived terrible teams. If he goes to Houston, that's amazing because he's going to be an RB1. He's going to get 250-plus carries. He's going to get a 10%-plus target share as a rookie.
I mean, just never forget, Jonathan Taylor was drafted to Indy to be a handcuff to Marlon Mack, right? People were so scared of Jonathan Taylor because Marlon Mack was there, because Nyheim Hines was there. How is this crowded backfield going to work out? So to that point and to your point, I think that's why Breece is pretty safe, because he could go to a team with a perceived crowded backfield, and it's going to clear up really quick when people see this 4.39 absolute workhorse Breece Hall step into the mix. And I like the comp. David Montgomery was a helmet scouting, low-hanging fruit comp for us because he was an Iowa State running back before the Combine. But I think after the Combine, Breece Hall left David Montgomery in the dust just from a measurables perspective. The 4.39, I mean, the broad jump at 5'11", 6'1" as a running back, jumping 126 is incredibly explosive. And the vertical is a 40-inch vertical. So not only is the speed there, but the athleticism and the explosive metrics are there as well from Breece Hall. He's young. He has the college production profile. The last boxes we need to check, you said it, landing spot probably is impossible to be a terrible landing spot. And the last box is draft capital. So if he can go in round 2, that's going to be huge. And who knows, maybe we'll get lucky and Breece will end up going in round 1. And of course, after draft day, we'll have to move and shake our rankings because Breece is the player on this running back list that's probably going to have the most change coming in the next month or two before we get into these drafts. But Steph, let's go ahead and move on to number 8 on our list, a polarizing player, Antonio Gibson. He's our consensus RB8. He's like a sleeper to me in the sense that I don't think of him as being someone that's really been exciting for fantasy over the last 2 seasons. But when you kind of check into the numbers, he was PPR running back 13 as a rookie and PPR running back 12 in his sophomore season. Last year, over 1,000 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns in a terrible Washington football team offense. We know he can catch. He came out of Memphis originally as this hybrid receiver running back. So last year, we finally saw an increase in the receiving numbers, had 52 targets, caught 42 of those for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns. The excitement came when J.D. McKissic signed this fake deal with Buffalo. We thought Antonio Gibson was going to really expand into more of a workhorse role and get that receiving usage that we wanted to see. But Steph, for me, the thing I struggle with Antonio Gibson as my RB8, I get that he has, the back-to-back solid seasons. He can do it through the air. He can do it on the ground. But with Antonio Gibson, he's going to be 24 years old this season. He's on a decent at best offense. And I just don't know if he's really going to expand into the workhorse role that we want to see as long as J.D. McKissic is there. So, Steph, is there more upside? I guess that's my question. With my top 10, if I'm going to have an RB1 in Dynasty, I want the upside where they can be a top 5 guy on a given season. So with Antonio Gibson as our consensus RB8, is there a range of outcomes where he ends up as a top 5 running back in the next couple seasons on in a single redraft year?
I think it's in the range of outcomes, but that percentage is pretty low. When he was first drafted, we thought, Ron Rivera's system, they love this guy. They took him early 3rd round. The draft capital's there. He brings in a skill set to be this next Christian McCaffrey, right? It's apparent now that was way too aggressive. And that was from Ron Rivera saying, like, hey, he can play the CMC role, and all the fantasy guys like us took that and ran with it. Those days, I think, are over. We're not hoping for that CMC season anymore. What I fear with Gibson is that he gets stuck in this Josh Jacobs situation where it's like we're hoping every year if he can get the passing work, if he can get the passing work, and he's just not giving us that passing work. But I love everything else that Gibson brings to the table. We've already talked about the age. The production is there. RB13 on the year, RB17 in fantasy points per game while dealing with toe and shin issues throughout the season on a brutal, at times, Washington football team offense that really just seems like they phoned it in down the stretch. But when you look at Gibson, 4th in carries last year, so the opportunity is tremendous. Has had double-digit touchdowns both years of his career. He was 4th in red zone touches in 2021. He's getting 16 carries, 3.3 targets per game. He is that workhorse. He is just essentially a younger Joe Mixon, and we saw Joe Mixon have struggles throughout his career where he was stuck in a horrible Bengals offense with Dalton at quarterback, with this rotation of names there, Ryan Finley, Brandon Allen, like all these guys I had to fill in. And I think you just essentially look at Gibson as the next Mixon, where 1 or 2 years from now, if Washington can bring some stability to the offense, I know it's Wentz this year, and I'll talk about some of that situation. I actually think Wentz is fine for Gibson's value Because you look at what Wentz just did in Indy, 108 targets to Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines. If we extrapolate that to Gibson and Mixon, which is probably a silly exercise to go down, but just to give us some context here, it's not a far stretch to see Antonio Gibson put up another 50-plus targets this year, and that's exactly what Jonathan Taylor did last year. 51 targets, 360 yards to the air, and 2 touchdowns. And we saw Antonio Gibson with Taylor Heineke and McKissick missing 6 games, 52 targets, 294 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So very similar to what Jonathan Taylor did through the air. And he's already getting the same receiving production as Jonathan Taylor. So the rushing volume will be there. Washington's been in the top half of the league in pace of play since Ron Rivera's entered into that organization. Last year, they were 6th in team run plays per game, courtesy of playerprofiler.com. The efficiency wasn't great, and that's certainly something holding Gibson back. It's been something that's held Mixon back as well, but that efficiency really doesn't matter for fantasy that much. 4 yards per carry is whatever, but he was 11th in yards created. So when the opportunity was there, Gibson was finding ways to evade tackles and create yards. Hopefully the offense can have at least some higher highs with Carson Wentz or whatever rookie they bring in to compete. We could see with Gibson a very similar situation to Mixon, where the team finally figures out their quarterback situation just as he's getting that extension at age 24, 25. You and I just did a deal where we swapped Mixon and Gibson because I wanted to get younger in my RB core. You wanted to go all in on this year. These guys are very, very similar.
This is tough because you're higher than me on Gibson, but I still have Gibson in the top 10 in my running back ranking. So for me, this is an area where I would be willing. I think the community, the people that play Dynasty as a whole are higher than me on Antonio Gibson. So I ended up with Gibson in that league where we talked about we swapped him and Mixon, and I just wanted to trade him for value because I see Mixon overall. I mean, we have him higher in our rankings, but it made sense for you from a roster construction standpoint. But if I have Antonio Gibson and I want to move off of him, this is a situation where I would love to trade Gibson for Josh Jacobs plus a late first, or for Josh Jacobs and a second, or a David Montgomery. I mean, you look at the difference between Antonio Gibson and Josh Jacobs. Like, Josh Jacobs didn't sniff our top 12, right? Like, we always think of him as a solid RB2. Antonio Gibson and Josh Jacobs are the same age. So Jacobs is 24 right now, Gibson's 23, but they're months apart. They'll both be 24 heading into the season. You look at Josh Jacobs over the past couple of years, he's finished ahead of Antonio Gibson in each of the past 2 seasons in production. His reception totals took a jump up to 64 targets, 54 receptions in 2021. Now the offense gets a bump with Davante Adams coming in. So if you look at these 2 situations, these 2 guys are the same age. Josh Jacobs had better draft capital coming out of college. Josh Jacobs has more production at the NFL level. He's in a better situation as more of a clear workhorse, has more of a chance of being a 3-down back on a better team. So I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, maybe this is a revelation. Like, why do we value Antonio Gibson so much higher than Josh Jacobs? Is it because we perceive him to be younger because he came into the league a year later? Or I guess the one thing working against Jacobs is the fact that he's going to be a free agent after this year. Actually, I guess they could give him they could utilize the team option and they'd both be under contract for the same amount of time. So that's the thing. Like, if you look at Antonio Gibson and Josh Jacobs, there's not much of a reason why we should be valuing Gibson higher, because everything we've seen to this point points towards Josh Jacobs. I think for us and for everybody else in the Dynasty community, it's the hope that Antonio Gibson can realize this potential, where with Josh Jacobs, we feel like we've already seen the ceiling.
Yeah, I think the takeaway really there is that Josh Jacobs is a sleeper.
Yeah.
He's a guy. Like,
true.
Everyone wanted to fade him because of the Kenyon Drake signing, and he ended up having the best season of his career after that. So I know you have a lot of Jacobs on your rosters.
Yeah.
Let's keep going down our list here. At number 9, our consensus RB9 is the man himself, Cam Akers. And this is going to be a hot take for a lot of people. This is another guy that has just put some PTSD into the minds of fantasy players because of the injuries, the missed time. Because when he's been on the field, he's been pretty good. But the injuries are very concerning, I will say. And in 2020 as a rookie, we saw Akers get the second-round draft capital from a Rams team that hasn't had a first-round pick in 5+ years. We thought, oh my gosh, wheels up. McVay found his guy. And I think it's pretty clear that Sean McVay wants Cam Akers to be the workhorse in this offense. They're like trying, they're forcing the ball to Cam Akers. We saw it in the playoffs. I'll talk about some of that volume here in a minute. But in 2020, we saw the rib cartilage separation, a super painful injury, a long timetable of recovery for a rib cartilage separation. Akers missed a game and then didn't play more than 30% of snaps until week 13. From week 13 to 17 in the regular season in 2020, Cam Akers averaged 19 carries and 3 targets per game. That's the Joe Mixon. That's the Antonio Gibson volume. And that's exactly what Akers is giving us in arguably a better situation than both of those that I just threw out there in LA with Matt Stafford, with Cooper Kupp, with now Allen Robinson, with one of the best offensive minds in the league, one of the best offenses in the league, a Super Bowl contending offense. And in 2021, we saw the Achilles happen preseason. Akers missed pretty much the entire year, comes back in the playoffs, has one game where he's kind of getting ramped up, sub 30% snap share, but then right back to 17 carries and 2.5 targets per game. Like, it's so apparent Sean McVay wants Cam Akers to be a 3-down workhorse. The defense makes Akers game script proof. Or if they're ahead, they're going to hand Akers the ball. If they're behind, they're going to give him checkdowns. But I don't expect this offense to be behind too much. And I think the red zone opportunities, that 15-plus touchdown upside is going to be there for Akers this year. And when you look at his overall profile, he hasn't even turned 23 years old yet. He has the size, speed, and athleticism. I think there's a lot of upside for Akers here. You just hope that he doesn't have another one of these injury-riddled seasons, because if he does, we're going to have to be changing our mindset around Cam Akers.
Yeah, Cam Akers is very, very tough. And he comes in at our RB9 just because of the potential of what we know he can be. We saw a flash of it in his rookie season. And the reason he's here above some of these veteran names is just because he is so young. He came into the league so young that it means he had a very slow ramp up as a rookie, battling injuries, had the torn Achilles, but yet he still goes into this third season at age 23. Like, he's a full year younger than Najee Harris, a full year younger than Antonio Gibson, who we just talked about. So for Cam Akers, there's a lot of rookies coming in this year that are his age. So, like, for all intents and purposes, if he can be fully recovered from this Achilles, if he can have the same speed, the same explosiveness as he had in the past, there's no reason we shouldn't value him. You know, where would we value him if he was in this rookie class, being in the situation he's in on the Rams? Probably as the RB2, maybe behind, right there in our rankings, behind Breece, but above Kenny Walker. So he'd be right there as the 102 in this year's draft. So when we look at Cam Akers, you just have to look at the efficiency from last year and worry a little bit. You know, it is a good sign that he recovered so quickly and was back on the field. Like, that's insane in and of itself. You have to like the fact that Sean McVay pushed him straight back into a workhorse role. He clearly wants Akers to be the guy. But you do also have to look at the 2.6 yards per carry and 0 touchdowns in the playoffs and say, hey, is that just a function of he got rushed back too quickly? Or is that a function of, hey, he's not the same player as he was before this injury? So with Cam Akers, the way I think about it is it's a gamble. There's a chance he's not the player he was before and that you could be caught holding the bag with Akers at an incredibly young age. But for me, the reason I've bought Akers in several leagues is because I think the upside outweighs the downside. I think people don't value him very high. I think we didn't see enough at the end of last season where people are all over Akers as this guy who's going to reemerge in 2022. And for me, for the prices you can get Cam Akers in some of these dynasty leagues, I think he is worth acquiring. Take the shot on the workhorse for the Rams and see what happens. And I think worst case scenario, he completely busters out and he's not the player he was before. Darrell Henderson takes over and they just move away from him. But best case scenario, if he can come out in 2022, put together a really good season as the workhorse and prove that he is back, you're getting a guy who's going to be in a lot of people's top 5, top 6 running backs in dynasty leagues. So for me, there is a gamble there, but I think the upside far outweighs the downside, which is why I'm trying to acquire Cam Akers in as many leagues as I can.
He could be right behind Javonte a year from now. He could
Absolutely
be right there. You're right there. Him and Breece Hall could jump over that tier of Najee, CMC, Mixon. We'll have to see how it plays out. I cannot wait. Let's talk about 3 more veterans. We can kind of lump these guys together, throw our takes there. There's not really a ton of new information that we can throw out there dynasty-wise, other than all these guys are now a year older, so their value has gone down. Saquon Barkley, Austin Ekeler, Alvin Kamara. These are 3 workhorse backs that get a ton of volume through the air. You like the situation for Ekeler, the most of these 3 guys, because the Chargers are an ascending offense. They have the rookie quarterback. They're pushing their chips in, You saw some of the splash defensive signings that they made, and we saw Ekeler have a monster season, finishing as the RB2 in fantasy points per game, top 15 in carries, led the league in targets, second in the league in red zone touches, and was number 1 in receiving yards. So this is truly a scat back plus. The best version of this player that you're going to find is at 5'9", 199 pounds. This is the hope for any time you see a player like a James Cook in this class, who is undersized but a pass-catching stud, who can break tackles, is elusive, super fast and bursty. But we saw the mountain that Ekeler had to climb, and he's about to turn 27 years old. So if we play the game, this is something that I've been pushing heavily in our Discord. When you think about buying a running back in Dynasty, play the game of worst case and best case scenarios a year from now, right? If Austin Ekeler just maintains what he's done the last 2 years, now you're looking at a 27, about to be 28-year-old workhorse running back where there could be murmurs of the Chargers taking somebody in the draft, bringing in a free agent because they want to push their chips in on this Justin Herbert rookie window. On the other side of things, if Ekeler, let's say, gets hurt, misses a bunch of time, maybe has just a rough efficiency year, maybe they bring someone in the draft and he enters a little bit more of a timeshare, now you're looking at a 27, 28-year-old scat back.
All the value's gone in that case from a dynasty perspective.
Exactly. And that's why he is lower. But for what he's going to give you this year, you have to love him. And in best ball drafts right now on Underdog, I'm looking at Ekeler top 5, top 6. I'm taking him over some of the names that you would typically think above him, like Dalvin Cook. Just because I'm worried about the age, and Ekeler is on a better offense that I expect to put up more numbers, and Ekeler's proven to get that volume from what we saw last year. Saquon Barkley is probably the highest upside, right? Runway to go up these rankings over the next season. We know what Saquon did his rookie year. It's just we haven't seen him get back to that. And there's a lot of questions with this Giants offense. Saquon was RB3 in fantasy points per game as a rookie in 2018, RB7 in 2019 in fantasy points per game, and then just had 2 injury-riddled seasons. Played 2 games in 2020, 13 games in 2021, just turned 25 years old. So he's not complete dust, and he really was coming in a generational talent. The question is, do you think he can get back there or not? You and I think, tend to think that he can, but there's just a lot of question marks for a guy who we're hoping to get back to his 22-year-old self at age 25.
Yeah, 2 really interesting names. And the reason they come in at number 10, number 11, and then Kamara, who we'll get into in a minute, at number 12 in our consensus rankings, is it's so tough in Dynasty because you mentioned the scenario with Ekeler where it's like you look at a year from now, best case, worst case. And yeah, best case, he's probably about the same value as right now, but probably a little bit harder to move off of because he is a year old. He is a year older. Worst case, he loses a ton of that value. And that's the game you have to play in Dynasty because at some point you have to win the championship, right? And Ekeler is a player who, if he's on your roster, he is going to help you win a championship this year. So you just have to weigh that out in these leagues, and you have to look at your league and say, how close am I to winning? And is Ekeler that piece that I think no doubt can take me over the top to make that push? Because if that's the case, he's certainly going to do it, could do that for the next couple of years, which is why we have him at number 10 coming off the best season of his career at age 26. But with Saquon Barkley, it is tough. And you and I are higher on him than consensus. And it's not even really higher than consensus. It's honestly like, are you in or are you out? Right? And like in doesn't even mean you think he's going to be a top 3 running back again. In means like, is he not total dust? And there's a lot of people I've seen that are like, I'm not touching Saquon Barkley. I don't want him. I don't value him at all. I think he's completely busted, which I think is a little bit ridiculous to think because last year we do have to remember he was coming off that torn ACL. He was on a bad offense. He took the first couple weeks to get ramped up, but we saw some efficient performances from him. I mean, in week 3, he put up 21 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 43 yards in that game. Week 4 put up 28 fantasy points, 5 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown in that game, added 13 for 52 on the ground. So something we have to remember about Saquon Barkley, he not only is a good running back on the ground, but he gives you the receiving upside as well. So there are a lot of question marks about his long-term future. Like, is he going to be in New York? Is he going to be somewhere else? Are they going to trade him? Are they going to, give him an extension? Probably not an extension at this point, but with Saquon, I think from a talent perspective, it's still there. It was a real shame to see him go down the way he did last season and then miss a bunch of time. And after that, he never could really get back to any elite performances for the rest of the season. But you wonder, how hurt was he playing in that offense? So for Saquon Barkley, for me, sitting here at age 25, I mean, he is already a little bit older as well. He's number 11 in our consensus rankings because he's in that category where I think if you look at a year from now, worst case scenario, he gets hurt again and he's complete dust. But best case scenario, if he has a good season this year, I think he starts to get closer to that, to how we're talking about a Joe Mixon type name right now. So I think there is a scenario where his value jumps from this year to next, which is why he's a little bit higher in our rankings. And I still do believe in the talent. When he was on the field and healthy, regardless if the team was good, bad, or in the middle, Saquon Barkley still was making plays, still was making defenders miss, still was giving us pretty solid fantasy football performances. So for that reason, he hangs on here as our number 11. And I take him over names like Kamara, over your Dalvin Cooks, Nick Chubbs, other guys that are really good players and are going to help you win championships this year. But it's for the same reason that you gave earlier. If you look a year from now, what's the best case scenario for Saquon? What's the worst case scenario? And what do you believe? And I think it trends towards that best case scenario side, again, as long as he can stay healthy.
Yeah, it's crazy how McCaffrey and Saquon 2 years ago were the chalk 101, 102, super flex, non-super flex, and now they're both having these injury questions pop up. It seems like being a workhorse back is not always a good thing. You need to have a breather back that can come in and help. Otherwise, your next 1 or 2 years could be completely shot. And in Dynasty, we hate to see that. So I'm going to stop overreacting and fading committees because I think there's actually some value to be had from a committee where, look, give me 3 or 4 less fantasy points per game, but give me a guy who has some more longevity and some more upside because he's healthy and on the field where he can put up touchdowns and get more receptions. We don't need him to be taking 15 carries a game on the ground. We're totally fine, like with DeAndre Swift. And one of the things I love about DeAndre Swift is that he's not being overused on the ground. Same thing with Alvin Kamara here. We have his RB12 still. You know, we're actually above consensus on keep, trade, cut. He's RB16. But, you know, we could be talking about any of these guys here at this next tier where after Kamara, there's some young names like Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, who are both coming off of seasons where they didn't play a single snap. There's even guys I have a name like Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb should be right there fighting for this tier. But for us, we have Kamara as the 12 because of the reliance of him in this offense where it's Michael Thomas and nobody else in the passing game. We're hoping for Adam Troutman to take that next step. We didn't see what we wanted to see in 2021. They're probably going to draft somebody. But there's questions at the quarterback spot. There's questions about the overall offense as a whole without Sean Payton. And that's why we take Kamara down from this locked and loaded RB1 to a guy who's holding on. He's holding on just barely. But I'm confident from a guy who's year in, year out, top 10 in snap share, opportunity share on a team that's top 10 in run plays per game. He was 6th in carries last year. And that was so exciting about Kamara in 2021 is that we saw him get more uses than he's ever gotten on the ground. Kamara is the engine of this New Orleans offense. If you look at what he's done since 2017, RB4 in fantasy points per game, RB4 in fantasy points per game, RB8 in fantasy points per game, number 1 in RB fantasy points per game in 2020, and then RB4 last year in 13 games played. So that is why that value insulation is so high. It's so hard to pivot off of these guys. I know he's about to turn 27. He's 26.7 years old right now. Kamara is, but for the next 1-2 years, even with this off the field stuff, those are all discount reasons to me for Kamara. And if I'm contending this year, I want him on my roster. And if I can pick up a 2023 first in that process, if I'm selling one of these higher names on our list, I love that deal.
Yeah, I agree. Kamara is just a rock solid option. And I get that he went from the number 1 season with Drew Brees with this offense down to, 4th in fantasy points per game. Oh, darn. He went from 1 to 4th, right? So with a terrible offense, with a quarterback carousel of Jameis, Trevor Siemian, and Taysom Hill, Kamara still was able to maintain elite fantasy football production and help your rosters last season. So with Kamara, I get it. He is getting older. You mentioned it. But you look at last season, and Jameis Winston, of all the quarterbacks they used, Jameis Winston was the best for Kamara's fantasy football value. There was a game in week 7 where it felt like the old Drew Brees days where they were just throwing to Kamara over and over and over. He had 10 receptions, 128 yards, and a touchdown in that game. You mentioned how much they used him on the ground. That load did get lightened a little bit at the end of last season when Mark Ingram came into the picture and started to take some of that work away. But I don't expect that to happen again this season. Mark Ingram's year older. I actually don't even know if he is under contract or not. Tony Jones has proved to be average at very, very best in the NFL. So maybe they bring in a rookie and they help give Kamara that relief that Latavius Murray used to give him back in the day. But with Alvin Kamara, there's no signs of decline from his actual play on the field, which you love to see. He is a little bit older, but with that age, you start to think about the narrative we've talked about all day with some of these workhorse backs. We're seeing a lot more injuries with these workhorse backs. It's great for a couple seasons, but they can fall off quickly. Now, this is a little bit down narrative street because injuries can be a little bit fluky and out of the blue. But with Alvin Kamara at that age, because his play on the field is maintained, you almost start to wonder, because of that lighter workload early in his career, because their ability to get him in space and utilize him more in the receiving game than grinding between the tackles and taking these beatings, is Kamara going to have a little bit more longevity on the back of his career because he's used in that way? I tend to think yes. I don't think necessarily at an elite top 10 level for another 5 seasons, but is there a world where Kamara could have 2 more seasons as, a top 8 to 10 running back in these PPR leagues, then have another 2 or 3 where he is valuable for your team as he gets close to, even 30 years old? I think that's in the range of outcomes, and it's in the range of possibilities for Alvin Kamara. So we have him here as our number 12. It's close with him and that other tier of guys, your Dalvin Cooks, your Nick Chubbs. Those guys are in the conversation. But I think for Alvin Kamara, the difference for me just is in his play style in these PPR leagues. And I think that's going to be more for his longevity moving forward. We saw Dalvin Cook start to break down a little bit last season. That's concerning for me. And then Nick Chubb, we know the narrative with him. He just doesn't give you a ton in the receiving game. A better football player than a fantasy football player. Although I do like the Deshaun Watson signing for his outlook in Cleveland. But it's close between those guys. We could throw any of them in the spot. There's some more young guys we could get into as well that are firmly in our RB2 range for Dynasty. But Alvin Kamara takes the spot for me at RB12. And he's someone where if I'm a contender and you are getting that discount based on some of the legal stuff, based on people thinking that the offense is terrible, I'm more than willing to go pick him up on the cheap if I can and use him for a contending roster.
Bringing Jameis Winston back on a 2-year deal was huge for Kamara just to have some stability. I'm sure they're going to bring somebody in to compete, if not this year, next year. But then you're looking at a 29-year-old Michael Thomas and then a rookie for this season. So Kamara is still going to be that tried and true go-to option in New Orleans as long as he's signed to that monster contract and still on that roster. But if you guys want to see 13 through 24, let us know in the comments down below. If you think we are completely off base with our takes, let us know in the comments. We're always open to hearing everybody else's thoughts. That's why we have the Discord channel. That's why we love our community, and that's why we're starting Dynasty Leagues once a month, it feels like, with everybody who joins that Discord channel. But thank you all so much for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.